Hello everyone, and welcome back to another edition of Indexer Office Hours. The day is the 22nd of August, and this is IOH 121. For anyone who is new to Indexer Office Hours, and let's have a look if we can find some new faces. I can indeed. This is the town square where ecosystem participants come together to discuss the most important and relevant topics for indexers. This is a conversation. We love participation. So by that token, if you'd like to get involved, please do unmute your mic or use the text box in the corner. Alrighty. As a reminder, last reminder, this is a session that's going to be recorded onto YouTube and published onto public channels like YouTube. So please bear that in mind if you're concerned about privacy. Now let's get into the agenda. So big shout out for 𝗨𝗂𝗧𝗧. I want to see, okay, he is here. One of our beloved regulars was featured on the 𝗨𝗂𝗧𝗧 podcast, which was amazing. And that person I'm talking about is Matthew. Matthew talks a bit about his background, some of the amazing work he's doing at Pinax, and the very exciting announcement that Pinax is now a core developer. So not to put you on the spot here, Matthew, but if you'd like to say a few words about the 𝗨𝗂𝗧𝗧𝗧 episode podcast, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah, thanks. Wasn't planning to say anything here, but yeah, it was definitely a fun event, talking to Nick and putting that podcast together. And, interesting telling my story of how I got into the graph. So, yeah, definitely a good listen, I guess. If you want to know a lot more about me and the journey that Pinax took to get here working with the Streaming Fast team for multiple years. So now you know the secret of why we know so much about Firehose and substreams.
There you have it. And the link is there in the chat. Thank you, Juan, for posting. Definitely do check it out if you want to learn more about Matthew and his background and all the stuff he's doing in the ecosystem. Wonderful. Now we move on to the next section, and I won't screw it up like I did last week. So I'll hand it over to Anna, who's going to take us into our regularly scheduled Repo Watch section.
Thank you, Abel, and hello, everyone. Today's Repo Watch is probably the shortest in history of Repo Watch. We have only had 2 new updates in the graph stack section. So here we have had release 0.32.0, which is a stable release. And I won't go through the changes because they're the same changes we went through last week with the 0.32.0 release candidate 0. But I'd be curious to find out if anyone has tried this new release and what kind of experiences you've had with it. And while people are typing, we also have a new release for Indexer Service and Agent, and this is release 0.20.0. And similarly to the graph node, this release contains the exact same changes as the previous release, so release 0.2018. So while there wasn't any new updates in the release notes, I'm assuming this release of Indexer Service and Agent is a lot more stable. And just quickly checking. Okay, so we have Thiago who will be saying a few words on that Indexer Agent release, which is awesome. And yeah, that's it from me this week. Thank you. Over to you, Abel.
I also have a small update regarding the Stake Squid release here because it involves the new graph nodes and index agents and service releases there. So I've upgraded everything to the latest versions and tweaked the whole repository a little bit yesterday. Should be a seamless transition. But yeah, if you find any bugs on testnet, please do let me know. And if not, yeah, I'm gonna proceed like after today's IOH. I'm gonna proceed on upgrading the mainnet repository. So yeah, please let me know if there's any bugs. Yeah. Happy indexing.
Thank you, Payne. And just to clarify, this is the Docker Compose.
Yes, correct. The testnet one.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'll make sure to double check in future repo watches. All right.
Yeah, the problem with that is that I don't do releases, so to speak. I just do like commits into it, and yeah, I should technically also kind of do releases, but like if there's nobody helping me to test, it's hard for me to know when everything is fixed and that there's a when the repo is ready to for like an official release card. So yeah, we'll talk and we'll see how we sync there.
Okay, sounds good.
Cheers, thank you.
All right, thanks, Payne, for your repo. This is very much appreciated, and I understand many indexers rely on that. Okay, guys, so we pushed a very quick release for the Indexer Agent 2020. It covers some bug fixes that we have observed during the first day of indexers actually using it. So we gathered all your feedback and we fixed them. So mostly it's related to how to the action queue and to indexer registration and what else? Yeah, it's all in the change logs. So and I would also like to disclose that at this moment we have a 2021 release in the works. We might release it today, and it is on the same situations, like very quick bug fixes. And before I jump into the details of 2020, I just want to tell indexers that we found a bug on the current version, the 2020 version, that is related to the parsing of command line arguments. So if you are using Indexer agent using YAML files for network configuration, you're safe. There's nothing to worry about. But if you're using the command line interface, or if you are using the agent in single network mode with environment variables or command line arguments for configuring it, you might notice that some options are not being picked by the agent, which are the allocate on network subgraph, the register option that defaults to false, the polling interval for your network provider, which defaults to 4 seconds, and the gas price max, which defaults to 100 GUI. So those options, those 4 options that I just said, aren't being picked up by the agent, and they are set to their default values. So that's what's going to be released on today's version, today's release. So if you use YAML files for configuring your networks, you should be good to go. No need to update to 21 now. And please, if you have any other bugs, please tell us so we can work on them. I will just look at the chat if anyone is okay. It's not GRT rate. I think it's just the gas price max. It's when sending transactions, you can set your maximum gas price. Currently, this for indexers that use command line arguments or environment variables. Yes, thanks for it. That's the ones. And the gas price max involves setting a maximum gas price for the transactions the agent sends. So I think this one might affect people a little bit. So, but then again, if you're using YAML-based configuration, which I believe Payne's stack already switched to, you should be safe. No need to worry about it. You'll be stick with those defaults for now. But we do plan to release a 2021 fix by the end of the day. So apologies for that, and please keep sending us the bugs, and we will be covering them. All right, I think that's it.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Now we will we'll hand over to Juan to get into Protocol Watch.
Thanks, 𝗨𝗂𝗟. So nice finally having the indexer agent working for the most part. So really excited about that. So getting into Protocol Watch, we have a few things to cover. First of all, forum governance as always. There's a post about a proposal to enhance the graph operations with SyncVote. So basically to use SyncVote for governance related things to gather community opinions and stuff. I'm not too familiar with SyncVote, but it seems they are proposing using it. So if you care to take a look, there's the link to a thread in the agenda. Then we have 𝗨𝗂𝗂𝗪, which is replacing bonding curves with indexing fees. I think there was pretty much good feedback, as well as a question regarding whether it's possible with this 𝗨𝗂𝗪 to also abstract away GRT for the indexing fees. I'm not going to go deep into this issue, as we have Howard to kind of go way deeper than I could into this issue in the open discussion. But yeah, so just so you know, there are some small updates in the thread, exactly as 𝗨𝗂𝗟 says. Then into forum research, we have a small update to 𝗨𝗪𝗟𝗀𝗃 Lab's August 2023 update. There were a few questions regarding some of the updates, so feel free to check them out if you want to. Getting into the contracts repository, we have a new PR related to changing the dispute manager to not delete the dispute results for bad actors, so that they can have use on chain for other stuff, which is quite nice. And then getting into the network subgraphs, and this goes hand in hand with the indexer agent changes, as well as the to transfer tools, deployments and stuff. Both the core network subgraph and the analytics subgraph have new releases regarding the L2 transfer tool support. This is version 0.20.0. So yeah, that's pretty much it. All of the work that has been done for the L2 transfer tools for the subgraph and its indexer agent have already been released. So yep, that's pretty much it for Protocol Watch. I'm going to hand it over to 𝗨𝗂𝗟 now.
Amazing, thank you. Seeing as we're kind of in this update phase, there's been a question that's come through, or a bunch of questions actually, on the mainnet Arbitrum situation. So I just wanted to pause here in case I know Pablo's on the call, wants to respond to any of these before we move on.
Hey, yeah, I can give an update on that, and I think it's timely because it's happening now. The contracts to support the L2 transfer tools have been upgraded this morning, and we're working on deploying the Explorer changes so that people can start using it. So that's happening right now, which means it will be deployed very soon. So that's, hours or maybe a day or two. It depends on how long the Explorer changes take and if there's any issues during that process, but it's being deployed now. So that hopefully answers question 1. Question 2, if an indexer already exists in Arbitrum, is it possible to simply specify its address to link accounts without a transfer? Sadly, no. Sadly, yeah, you need to transfer at least 100k GRT to link the two accounts. You can keep the address that you already had on Arbitrum, so there's no need to create a new indexer there, but you do need to transfer stake to it for them to get linked. And then question 3, if somebody wants to transfer 2 indexers into one in Arbitrum, is that possible? Yes, from a contracts perspective, the L1 side, I think, doesn't care if 2 indexers are sending to the same address on Arbitrum, so it should be fine. I can't guarantee that there won't be anything weird showing up in Explorer if we do that, but I think it should be fine. I would suggest trying that on testnet first, and if it works on testnet, then it should work on mainnet.
Wonderful, thank you so much, Pablo.
There's another question there that is, we already have more than 100k. Yes, unfortunately, because the L1 side doesn't know what's on the L2 side, the first time you transfer, it always needs to be 100k or more.
If they already have.
Right?
I think it's because the 100k that they have not gone through the transfer itself, the transfer tools themselves. So the transfer tools don't know that they have more than 100k. I think that's basically the main issue.
Right. Yeah, the L1 contract is not aware of whatever happens on L2 unless it starts from a transaction in L1. So that's why it has to be through the transfer tools that you send at least 100K to kind of validate that the L2 side already has the minimum stake. But yeah, only for the first time. After that, you can send smaller amounts.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Pablo, for the updates there. I'll let folks continue in the chat. Yeah, if any other questions arise, please do type it there and we can get it answered for you. But yeah, thank you so much, Pablo. And yeah, this is very exciting. Cool. Well, now we move on to the section with Howard, where he's going to go a bit into the 𝗨𝗀𝗂𝗪 58, I believe. As Juan alluded to earlier. So Howard, if you're here, feel free to fire away.
All right. Let me try and share my screen. Can everyone see this slide?
Yes, we can indeed.
Okay. Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and start. So as I understand, I have around 10 minutes and we can ask some questions. I highly encourage you guys to all read the GIPs afterwards and provide any feedback because that'd be really helpful as we, make our plans for implementation. So the crux of it is that there's a lot of problems with curation today. These slides are quite similar to some of the slides at a core dev call recently, and a couple of high points, as far as pointing out issues that we're well aware of with curation, and that's that subgraphs are heterogeneous, meaning that they take different amounts of effort or cost to index, and this can lead to uncertainty on the indexer side because it might cost you a lot to index one subgraph and not a lot for another one, and you might be getting paid the same based off of how much signal there is between these two subgraphs. And in addition, because of how other indexers stake on other subgraphs, that may affect how much revenue you get for indexing a particular subgraph today because of all the signal and curation. And so that can lead to uncertainty for you indexing something and actually knowing how much you're going to get out of that. In addition, over time, people can start adjusting their stake. And so that adds to not just uncertainty right now, but like as we evolve, you're indexing and then it's changing on you. And so we want to reduce a lot of this uncertainty that indexers experience. And then also note that curation itself today is not really pointing out query fees. If you go to the studio, we're well aware of this. So really the goal with this effort was to design some sort of mechanism that would address these issues. We wanted to make it as streamlined and clear for indexers to be able to be profitable by indexing things, and also for consumers to tell them, hey, here's a subgraph that I'm willing to, to pay for, please index this one. So we kind of need to match up both sides of that. Okay, so the crux, here is just that we want to enable indexers to be able to post the price that they, are willing to accept for some amount of work. Because we don't know how much work it will be total to index a particular subgraph in advance, what we can instead do is say, look, this is how much it costs me per unit of work. I'm intentionally being vague here on what I mean by work, but the idea is that if you can figure out roughly the cost per unit of work, you can just post this, whether that's on a website or whatever. I'm leaving that out of scope for this particular moment. But the idea is you can post that and then consumers can come and pick the indexers. Now I say choose indexers. I'm going to come back to this as far as what we mean here, but they could pick an indexer, whether that's someone they like or someone in a particular geographic location. And then what they do is they enter in some sort of agreement with this graph horizon topic that's been sort of becoming developed these last few months. So there's more details on that coming as well later. But right now we should know that the consumers and the indexers enter some sort of agreement where the indexer is going to get paid to index the subgraph. So next I'm going to start unpacking some of these, high-level questions that we might have. So actually first, let me see if we just recently, okay. I'm not following the chat until I get to the end of the slides, but happy to answer questions then. So we wanted low cognitive load. In other words, we don't want people to necessarily have to scroll through however many thousands of indexers there might be someday. And so there could be a way that we do an automatic selection. Maybe we want something where there's 7 indexers on a subgraph, but we want them to be, let's say, geographically dispersed so that there's, well-balanced like let's say latency in different geographic regions. There's all sorts of ways this indexer selection can be done. And so we can sort of abstract this away. We don't want the consumers necessarily to have to scroll through all of these. Okay. So further on that, the user can, specify some preferences. Now, what preferences will be included in any sort of initial version are up for discussion. I'm not saying that any of these are fixed in stone. And so really, this is where your guys' feedback would be really helpful. And so there's sort of a possible way of doing it manually, but we expect that most people will actually want some sort of automatic selection. And how do we get redundancy? So if a consumer comes and they say, hey, I picked 7 indexers or 5 indexers, how do they actually know they're going to get 5 indexers? That will not be able to be handled on chain. You can do so, but there is an exorbitant cost to doing so, where someone has to pay a lot of money. Essentially, it's going to degenerate into a couple of cases. And so this will largely be done through external things. You can think of some sense of reputation, whether that's through websites, Twitter, Discord, you personally know the indexer, whatever it might be. If we have these sorts of things happening and we see that someone's duplicating their identity, people can quickly say, hey, that's a no-go. They can call that out. So we can dive into that more. There's some more talk on the GIP about this as well. And one question that has come up with people is, well, if I'm not selected, can I still index a subgraph? Because I know that there's a lot of query fees or something else, particular about that subgraph. Maybe I want to help support this project. You're more than welcome to. We're not by no means trying to stop that. This is just giving consumers a mechanism by which to tell indexers, hey, I'm willing to pay you to go index this, and I'm willing to pay you your going rate that you listed. Last question we have here is, are there other benefits? Essentially, consumers can stop paying the indexers that aren't performing well. So if there's an indexer that refuses to serve queries and they're sort of making it more difficult for other indexers on that subgraph to be profitable, the consumer could decide to say, hey, I'm not going to pay you these indexing fees anymore. Another possibility is that instead of consumers having to put up 10,000 GRT or however much GRT, instead they could pay an ongoing cost to indexers that want to index a subgraph. And as referenced before, this can help remove some inefficiencies that we currently have due to stake-based selection. And by that, I mean there's lots of potentially smaller indexers that could be really well performing. They could offer great quality of service, but they might not have as much stake as other indexers. So it could be the case that the indexer with the most money isn't always the best one. And so we can sort of mitigate some of these concerns if they're, also wondering about like centralization aspects. Okay, so I'm trying to see if there's any questions. Okay, so last thing here on the overview, what does the process look like? So indexers can post prices in some fashion. These will be publicly available to everyone. And then there's some process of selection, whether this is a consumer going and saying, hey, I want Alice, Bob, and Charlie, or it could be an automatic thing where it's sort of like rolled up into these subscriptions. And so maybe the subscription says, hey, we want indexers from these locations, whatever it might be. That is where the selection happens. And once an indexer is selected, we'd like to make some sort of notification arrangement. Now, this is really a part where the community feedback could be helpful in knowing what the best means of notification is. And so once an indexer and consumer have, each been aware of this agreement and agreed to it, they enter into it, the indexer can then index a subgraph, post the POI, and there's the dispute period where there could be arbitration for, submitting a bad POI. And then afterwards, the indexer gets their funds back, and then they can continually sync and keep getting payments where they submit a POI whenever they need to collect any additional funds. And so once they're finally done, they can retrieve the final funds at the end. So the idea here is that bonding curves will be replaced with this idea where consumers can directly pay the indexers rather than having this sort of like roundabout way we do today. And that hopefully indexers, if they're able to actually, measure their cost, they can post prices that will ensure that they will be profitable whenever they're accepting these agreements. And so I highly encourage you guys to give any more feedback, and I'm ready now to, try to field any questions as we have time. Thanks, guys.
Wonderful. So I've been going through the chat and labeling the questions with the question mark, so it's easier for you to identify. So let's see what we have here. Derek asked the question, display is an average / mean, and I'm assuming he's referring to something that you mentioned in the slides there. But if you want to add some more context, Derek, feel free to.
Yeah, this is just in response to Payne's question on how to avoid the race to the bottom on that.
I see.
My thought was in response to that, saying maybe we could display an average or a mean price amongst indexers to consumers. And that way they're not just picking the bottom 3 or the bottom 5 or whatever.
Gotcha.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Payne also
one
made...
more contact.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that, yeah, so in addition to not just being a race to the bottom, like you could imagine that some indexers do a great job, and that should be a factor that's posted alongside someone, so they can know if they're just racing to the bottom, they might get really terrible quality. I don't know if that helps answer your question as well, Derek.
Hopefully it does. Yeah, I think the broader point Payne was making is that he felt like this is a race to the bottom. So maybe, I mean, you kind of touched on it there, but maybe if you want to provide a bit more context there.
So I assume here race to the bottom means everyone just competing on price. And if people start posting prices too low, then those indexers are going to have to eventually shut down shop because they're not going to be profitable. Naturally, there is going to be some sense of competition. I'm not going to say that there won't be. But we would imagine there's going to be distinct, types of consumers. Some will probably be quite happy to pay a premium for, let's say, more decentralizations. They'll happy to be paying, maybe 7 indexers or however many it is on a particular subgraph. And maybe other small dApps will only be willing to pay a few. And so I could see that if you have different hardware setups, I mean, that also is going to factor into the cost. I don't know enough to say what those will be, like where those different, let's say, tiers might be, but I imagine that there's like essentially different products of indexing services, as you might see, where there's like the high price ones that have, a very nice quality of service or other things, or maybe there's just the indexer is able to be reached on Discord. These are sorts of other factors we want to encourage consumers to keep in mind rather than just the price. And so I think that there will be a reasonable effort needed to be put into saying, here's how we're going to display these things so that people can actually demarcate on these different features rather than just saying price.
So is this going to directly involve gateways in it by any chance? Because right now we have a problem with like the gateway, the indexer selection algorithm. Usually, like I said in the chat, same and like index of roughly the same size with the same kind of machine and the same data center. One of them gets all the queries, the other one doesn't. So if a subgraph developer picks multiple indexers to index his subgraph, does the gateway pick between those, or does it, like, how would the payments work, or doesn't, like, or is this not related in any way to the query fees? It's just the indexing rewards that are being sent.
Yeah, I don't think that it necessarily relates to query fees. So I think, let me try to state something and see if I'm following you correctly. The consumers or a gateway on their behalf selects a number of indexers, and then those indexers are said, if they agree, then they start indexing. And your question is, will we have some sort of disproportionate thing where there's 2 indexers that look very similar, but one's getting most of, let's say, the indexing fees?
Yeah,
is that correct?
Yes.
If they're both very similar, I don't see why that would necessarily be the case, especially if there's some sort of, let's say, balancing, feature that goes on in a selection algorithm. The selection stuff can be done via different gateways. So as there's more gateways coming out, they might have, we're going to do it this way. We're always going to go by, geographic locations, trying to make sure we have as many selected. So if there's two indexers that have same performance, but they're in the same location, maybe one of them gets selected at 50% chance, whatever it might be. This is going to largely, as I understand it, for the automatic selection, be up to the gateways, being clear to everyone and how they're operating. But if we're doing the manual selection, then it would be quite odd to me if one indexer was getting way more, especially if the consumer is able to see that they're both pretty much the same. Does that sort of address what you're doing or asking, or is there a little more to that we should unpack?
Yep, sounds good. Yeah, it's pretty clear. And like Stake Machine brought up an interesting topic, backroom deals. How do we avoid this?
By making it easier to go through the protocol than not.
Okay.
So this is a really a good point, because at the end of the day, we need to have a very streamlined and smooth experience for our users to make sure that they want to use the graph rather than just kind of like, it's like going into a bookstore, finding a good book, and then buying it on Amazon. We want to make sure that we're creating an experience that they actually want to go, directly to Amazon first or whatever it is to find what they need.
Sweet. There are some more questions as well. I've just labeled them with the question mark, so feel free to tackle any one of those there. Some of them are L2 transfer tools related. So yeah, just.
Oh yeah, Pablo, feel free to jump on for those.
Awesome.
Jim has a good point. What's the purpose of the network and the market of indexers and the security of stake if selection is much more of a direct relationship between consumer and indexers? It seems to me this lessens the value prop of GRT. That is true in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a great question, Jim. So a number of things can happen off-chain, and you could actually imagine that some things will be better off-chain just because they're, let's say, more efficient or easier to scale, whatever it might be. But the things that we're hoping for on-chain, even if there is a direct relationship between a consumer and an indexer, is the notion of security here in saying, hey, if you did a bad job, I have, let's say, some sort of escrow account or something that can be slashed as a penalty. And if you go around the network to do that, if you're in different jurisdictions or whatever, you might not have guarantees that you'll actually be able to settle those things in an amicable fashion. And so I think that's kind of the value proposition we're shooting for here, is that the security of these things. Does that answer your question, Jim?
If you're unmuted, Jim, we can't hear you.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, loud.
Yeah, now I can.
Hey, Howard. Thanks for presenting. Just to follow on, do you feel like your response was really useful? Thank you very much in terms of clarifying there's still a value prop there. I guess the follow-on question I would ask is, do you feel like the sort of radical changes that Horizen might bring are really required in order to make this type of indexer selection dynamic work well?
Well, the selection of indexers is not necessarily contingent on Horizen. What the reason is for Horizen is to say how we're going to secure the data services for various types of data services, not just one particular data service. And so this has a lot to do with, think about like the arbitration process and things like that. So could you do dips without, let's say, Horizen as it's, currently been discussed in conversations? Potentially. But the point here is mostly with Horizen is about how you secure the transactions and the services. And when I'm thinking about, this coordination, a lot of that coordination, as far as, let's say, finding indexers and so on, will be off-chain. At least, it presently can be if it's through Discord or whatever. And so when we're saying, does this need Graph Horizen, the part of it that I would ask, well, do we need it, is how are we going to secure that the services you are requesting as a consumer or that you're offering as an indexer are actually going to take place? And without some sort of robust guarantees on that front, economically speaking, that's where we're going to have problems. And so if we don't have something like Horizon Core or some alternative, then it's just us all going on trust. And then I don't know what the best option, like how we're going to provide a foundation with that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. Because my understanding of Horizon is, at face value, is that it's really a market for lots of different products. One of them being, what we do today with indexing data services. But it's also a market for decentralization. So is there a value in terms of stake, or this is where I thought maybe it ties into what you're working on here. Is there also a tie into the value of a query based on how decentralized the delivery of that query is, or how resilient the service in general is, however, depending on how many indexers you have, maybe in your selection preference in this. So I thought that maybe the two sort of play together in order to provide ultimately a better service. And then also, one of the things that's been a big problem, and I think everybody's aware of it, is actually understanding why price is why a query is the price it is, and nobody can really explain that. And even in the earliest days of Brandon would do a number of workshops where we would try and do things like cost out. How much does it actually cost in compute to deliver a million transactions? And everybody was coming in with numbers all over the place. So, I mean, although this sort of stuff I feel is quite radical in the way it changes things, I think it's potentially necessary in order to get us to a world where we're actually building viable businesses here. Because at the moment, doesn't feel like that, right? And even if we had more queries, I don't think it would feel like that either, because we would still be trying to answer this question of what's the value of the query and what are the things that a consumer actually wants to pay for? Latency, performance, geography, we don't actually really know. And I think something like this, although radical and has a lot of second order effects when you think about, is something, I'm really glad that you're sort of putting something out there in public that we can all talk about.
Yeah, I feel like you touched on a number of important topics there. I can't address all of them, and I also need to make sure it's clear that there's lots of people involved in this, even though I might be the one talking right now. When you're specifically saying about decentralization or robustness in queries and how that might be priced in, this can really only be a consequence after there is a relationship between, let's say, supply and demand on query pricing. And I know I'm not trying to say anything fancy here. What I'm mostly just going to say is that I can resonate with your sentiments, and that we need it to be very clear for indexers, what the price is going to, can be or not. And so there, as I understand it, is ongoing work at the gateway level about how queries are priced and will be priced, according to, like, let's say, these subscription payments and so on. So I can't speak to the details of those right now. But once those are able to establish, hey, here's what consumers are willing to pay, and then they're able to say, hey, this is how many indexers I can afford with this payment. At that point, then we can start to talk about these second order things where we're saying, here's the robustness level the consumer is willing to pay. And so if they say, oh, well, it costs, I'm going to make up a number, 7 GRT for this query, based on the average, cost that it's going to require for me to get one indexer, I can say, okay, well, I'm willing to, budget 5 times that, so I'll have 5 indexers. But there's a lot of work to be done before that can happen. And what I'm mostly referring to right now is at the gateway level. And so that's still out of scope of the DIPS thing. But with DIPS, we're still trying to get in a similar fashion of having the cost of indexing reflect the actual, or the prices paid for indexing actually reflect the cost that indexers incur. I forget what your rest of your comments were, so you can remind me.
I was waffling a little bit, but I see Derek's made a sort of, there's a good question there from Derek, so I won't take up any more of your time. Thanks, Howard.
Okay. No, is the short answer to Derek. We are not turning off indexing rewards. Yes, this is a very important question. I want to make sure that's clear. So we're proposing turning off indexing rewards completely and replacing that with what? Okay, so what this is doing is it's redirecting how indexers are paid for indexing. And so right now, that is entirely through indexing rewards. And what is being proposed here is enabling Alice to pay Bob directly to index. We are not saying that we're going to suddenly turn off indexing rewards. But one consequence of a design like this is that you don't have curation signal on each subgraph. So instead, you have to change how indexing rewards operate. And that hasn't really been discussed in this GIP, but it actually will be discussed in the Horizon Core GIP or Graph Horizon GIP that's upcoming. And the simple version is that from as much as we can tell so far, it appears as though if we simply remove that part of the formula from the indexing reward, so that it's not saying this subgraph specifically, the indexing rewards, can be printed at the same or minted at the same rate that they currently are and distributed in a similar fashion, where if you're staking 37% of the GRT, then you get 37% of the rewards. So it's actually quite similar to how it happens today. But in addition to that, if an indexer is saying, well, what should I be indexing? That is where this GIP will play a specific role in telling indexers, Alice is willing to pay me, 1,000 GRT per day or week or whatever it might be to index this particular subgraph. So I'm going to spend my effort on that subgraph. So definitely not turning them off. That is not a part of this proposal. Good, important question, Derek.
Alrighty, seems like we're getting a lot of questions on this, so we'll keep going. There's been a lot of chat in the chat box here, so if we've missed your question, please do repost or unmute your mic and feel free to ask Howard.
Just posted the question: how does the consumer know where the indexer is located? Because assuming the consumer pays the indexer directly, they basically have to know where the location is, because they'll be the ones serving the queries, right?
Yes, I think this has to do with the actual discovery process. Am I understanding that correctly? Like if they go on to, the Explorer Studio or whatever it might be, you're saying how can they find that out?
Yep.
And I think that, that is an important question, especially if you're trying to say, hey, I want to pick one on, let's say, each continent or whatever it might be.
Yep.
In that case, we want to make sure that there is the availability for indexers to do so. I have not, I'm going to be very clear. I actually haven't talked with the product team to see what the plans are or scheduling or anything on that front. But if that is an important factor to consumers, as I think many of us might expect that it will be, I think we should bring that up as a conversation point to see what the best way of communicating that would be. So I think that's what we can follow up on.
One more thing that's worth doing, in my opinion, is something that I was asking for somewhere in 2020. What if the indexer service could be run alongside with a Postgres database somewhere else rather than near all your, have multiple indexer services in each geolocation, all tied to your same indexer address, basically. That would be the end goal, because then you would have an indexer server in multiple continents. Otherwise, you'd have to split that stake into multiple indexers.
Maybe people.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I haven't thought about this, so I'm gonna have to say we should follow up on the forum on that one.
Okay, for sure.
That's interesting to know.
I actually wanted to make a forum post about this.
I see some comments from Peter Pan about making it profitable to cover expenses. Have we addressed those? And saying that, if you're able to say, here's how much I'm willing to do it for, that you can say up front, hey, if it costs me $100 per day to do something, I'm going to charge 110 or whatever it might be. That way you can ensure you're profitable. Is that clear from this discussion?
Yeah, one would hope. But yeah, appreciate the clarification there. Okay, seems like there's another question here. How do we make sure smaller indexes get queries at all? I'd imagine it would be reflective of delegation, big name, big stake. I'll use this one. It's a question from Vince from Notify. Thanks for reposting.
Oh, yeah, good question. So the discovery process here doesn't necessarily just have to be off of stake. For example, if you want to be discovered or selected, and you see that there's some big indexer Bob, and you want to be selected in front of him, you could compete on various fronts without saying, "Hey, I'll make myself more available." You guys can reach out to me on Discord, Telegram, Slack, or whatever. Just like whatever competitive advantage you might have. Naively, you could also just say, "Look, I'm going to offer 1 GRT per unit of work less than him, or something, so that somebody will prefer me over him." I don't want to dictate what your guys' business model should be, but I want to make it clear that stake is not going to be the only factor, or should not be the only factor, because indexers can provide a competitive advantage in many ways, and finding out what like the right Pareto front or balance of all of those is definitely like up for you guys to determine or discover from the consumer demand.
I see Vince typing. Hopefully that answers your question. If not, feel free to follow up in the chat box.
Abel, is there a time? I don't know what it's after this, like how we are doing.
We have another small topic to cover, but like no stress, we can keep going. Like I just want to make sure that everyone's questions are answered on this topic. So yeah, and also I recommend everyone here to, of course, direct everything to the forums. I'll post a recording of this into the forum post itself, just so everyone has one place to go to capture all of the information. But any final, let's do like a final round of questions, and then we can move on to the next topic. So feel free to type in the chat in case we haven't answered your question, or if you have a new question. Or feel free to unmute your mic. We'll go for a last round.
Not necessarily a new question, but still regarding like smaller indexers. In my opinion, they probably cannot compete with big indexers because like usually people's reaction to big numbers is big number safe. Yet they don't care about anything else. Same goes with delegation today. Like most of the big indexers have like a lot of delegation simply because they're big and people trust their money with big guys, basically.
Was there a question attached to that, or are you just looking for?
No, I just want to debate this with everyone that has like opinions regarding this. But I see both Vince and Anton are going on the same direction.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting point. I'll say that historically, looking at industries outside the graph, there are lots of examples where a small company or competitor can topple a larger entity or offer some new differentiated service, such that the new one is no longer able to compete with their new thing, whatever that might be. So in the short term, yeah, like if you're trying to compete in the exact same way as a big indexer, then that can be unfortunate. But I think that there are, like, it seems quite likely that there are avenues that a small indexer could offer. Maybe that's a different type of data service. Maybe they're specializing on indexing on a certain type of subgraph. I don't know. But it seems like there's a lot of room for innovation here, especially because it's so new. Would be my comment. Not to say that there aren't disadvantages, of course, at the outset from being a small indexer.
I'm just trying to think of ways a smaller indexer could compete realistically. I mean, yeah, you could be available and all this other stuff, but they can too, and much more available than you can. They have marketing departments, they have their own Discords, they have sites, they have just, everything a large business has, and you might be one person, and the only thing you can really logistically compete on is price, and you're going to have to turn that down to a point where you're not even profitable yourself, or you can't sustain it for very long. And I don't see how you could possibly compete, especially when, you might be reaching out or, trying to do everything you can to capture capture customers for queries, and they have 7 other people on top of you doing that, and all you can do is hope to drop your price to where it doesn't make sense to them. But then I think you drive yourself into a point where you're not making any money either or serving any queries.
All right. Seems like there's a lot of chat on this particular topic. So yeah, keep firing away. I would recommend also posting everything that you guys want to kind of debate or discuss further into the forum post. I think that should be the place that we have all the information. So feel free to do that. In the last 5 minutes, I want to switch to a topic where we cover. It's a kind of a shout out for next week's episode. We have Tachi with us today, pronouncing the name correctly, and he's going to tell us a bit about Playground's analytics and why that can be interesting for indexers, and maybe give us like a sneak peek of what is to come for next week. So Tachi, if you're able to unmute your mic, feel free.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me over, Abel, and it's really nice to get to meet everyone and hear some of the amazing conversations, especially with improving the network. I'm Tachi. I'm one of the co-founders, and I'm the CEO of Playgrounds Analytics. And what we do is we're essentially on the consumer side or the demand side of the graph ecosystem. So we provide easy-to-use solutions and tools for data analytics, especially leveraging subgraphs. Some of you might be familiar with some of our tools. We have Subgrounds, which is our open source Python tool that allows you to interface with any subgraph and query it like you would with any Python object in your favorite analytics environment. And recently, we just rolled out our Playgrounds API, which I think it's quite interesting given the conversation going on today. Is our attempt at streamlining and simplifying how users, especially data analysts, interface with decentralized subgraphs. So using the API, completely abstract some of the complexities that are normally associated with leveraging GRTs and bridging it over in the traditional ways of interfacing with a subgraph, decentralized subgraph specifically. So I was looking forward to giving a demo, and I think we'll kind of pick another day where we have a little bit more time to dive into it. And during that demo, we'll kind of showcase Subgrounds as a really cool tool that anyone here, especially as indexers, could use to perform benchmark tests on your indexing setup, for example. But also if you're a data analyst or user of subgraphs, how Subgrounds can help you streamline some of your workflow. And so, yeah, I'm really looking forward to giving that demo and discussion some more next time we stop by. Thank you so much, Abel.
You're very welcome, and I'm excited for that conversation as well. Awesome. So we've got a final 4 minutes, so we can circle back on any of the topics that we've spoken about, or we can. What does this say? Okay, that's in relation to a conversation with Ford. Yes, we have the final 3 minutes. So yeah, feel free to fire away with any sort of questions, thoughts, or we can wrap today's conversation as well, if there aren't any additional thoughts, questions. So Alex is referring to his question, which I believe is related to transfer tools. So I guess I'll direct that to Pablo, if Pablo's still here. Yeah, he is. Yeah, so the question is, let me just repaste it, just so it's easy to find. There we go.
Okay, so which question? Alex's question?
Yes, but I've reposted it here. But he's also put another question here, Delegator.
Yeah, I was looking
yes.
at the second one. Okay, I'll look at the one you posted then. One of the others of the delegators, so for indexer has an ETH trainer.
Feel free to add more context there? Because I'm also a bit confused, Alex.
You can't change the beneficiary address on the lock contract. So basically, it looks like somebody's has had their seed compromised, and they're trying to find ways to get the GRT or whatever it might be out before the malicious actor can.
There are a few things there. Like if your seed that is beneficiary of the vesting transfer of the vesting contract has been compromised, you're in trouble. But you can change your beneficiary when you're transferring from L1 to L2. So when you set your L2 beneficiary, when you do the first transfer from your vesting contract, you have to set an L2 beneficiary, and at that point you can set any beneficiary that you want. So when the transfer tools are out, make sure you run that before the attacker, I guess. If they run it first, then they'll get the L2 beneficiary set to their own address, right? If it's an automated thing and you can still run other transactions, then you might be fine, I guess. You have to set that when you run the transfer tools for the vesting contract for the first time.
So you'd be safe for your migrated lock contract, assuming it was an existing pending lock contract that wasn't completely vested, but you'd still be at risk on your original contracts if you had something still in it, because you can't change the beneficiary of that one.
Yeah, so in that case, I guess if you transfer everything to L2 as quickly as possible, then you'll be protected on those once it's transferred.
Mm-hmm.
If the attacker front runs you, then I don't think there's anything you can do. Yeah.
There you go. Hopefully that's useful for you, Alex. Thanks, guys, for responding to that. There seems to be another question here. Can L2 addresses be changed, or is this tied forever?
The one used for the transfer tools, that's one time only. You set it and it's going to be your L2 address for transfer tools forever. Once you're on L2, the vesting contracts do support changing the beneficiary. But for the L1 to L2 transfers, that's always like there's only one address that you set and you can't change it.
But as a delegator, can you delegate to, like, can you move your stake to multiple indexers on L2 from L1?
So from L1, when as a delegator, the transfer tool, you use it per delegation. So if you've delegated to indexer A, you can only transfer it to indexer A's L2 address. If you delegate it to indexer B, you can only transfer that to indexer B's L2 address.
Oh, nice. So they can't pick yet another indexer without like unstaking and going through all the process.
You always have the 28-day period. The only scenario where you can undelegate without waiting for the 28-day period is if the indexer has transferred all of their stake to L2. And we put that as a way for delegators who don't want to move to L2 to be able to withdraw. Technically, you could undelegate, bridge manually, then delegate to someone else. But it's only in the case when someone has fully transferred to L2.
Got it. Thank you.
Just want to follow up here on what Marc-Andre is saying. Completely want to echo that, that we should follow up on the conversation in the forum, and he's also added some additional context to read before checking out the proposal and extra details. So thank you so much, Marc-Andre, and we are at the top of the hour, as always, I'd like to take this opportunity to wrap today's conversation. But as I mentioned, always feel free to stick around and just vibe. This will be the official stopping of the recording and closing of IOH. But as always, you guys are welcome to hang around and vibe. So with that, thank you so much thank you everyone so much for coming along. It's been a pleasure. Today was a very interesting conversation. I learned a lot. I hope you did too. And yeah, looking forward to next week's conversation. We'll have Tachi and his CTO talk a bit more about Playgrounds analytics and show some demos and stuff like this. So yeah, looking forward to that. And thanks everyone. Take care. Bye bye.
Cheers, y'all.